public interest disclosures and whistleblowers. So there's a fair bit we'll go through a summary, but we'll give you all the references where you can find more information as well. We've got it covered across different states, different regulators, and different jurisdictions.
Yeah, and I was going to say, because we missed the deadline because we'd already finalised this presentation. Some of you probably saw there was the Ruby Princess was back in the news cycle today, that they've successfully had claims awarded against, the passengers have had claims awarded against the Ruby Princess. So I guess that's all relevant.
The class action got up, mate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, all right.
Chris, when we get to that bit, you can give us a bit of an update if you've got something to share. That would probably be
so look, oh, there we go. There's Clarko. We'll let you in. Hey, Clarko.
No, that was the extent the class action got up.
That's it. That's the end, is it? Yeah, nice.
Okay, so
thanks, Chris.
We value your contribution.
Yep.
Okay, so resources to support today. We're going to give you a fair bit because we've actually been updating and reviewing some of our position papers, white papers, all sorts of collateral. So there's probably going to be a fair few attachments we'll fire after today. One of them that we found really useful recently was the New South Wales Ombudsman guidelines on the new Public Interest Disclosure Act, which is relevant for, I would say, the majority of us in here. So it covers off people in the disability and aged care sector. It covers off local government workers, covers off obviously state public servants in New South Wales. There's an equivalent for Daniel and Clarko. There's obviously an equivalent in Queensland in terms of public interest disclosure, but that was a seminar we went to with the Governance Institute last week or the week before. That was really informative. We've got a couple of bits of media out at the moment. We've got an op-ed in the Canberra Times around whistleblowers and their importance to society, so I'll hand you over that one. And we've also got some links to radio and media that Bron and or I have done in the last couple of months that are all relevant to these topics.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to cover that, or do you want to do that?
Can you take the first dot point and then I'll take the others?
Okay, so without going down too much of the rabbit hole on the new New South Wales Public Interest Disclosures Act, the probably safest summary around that is that for public interest disclosures, which are essentially disclosures that a member of the public service, which includes also government-funded entities in the NDIS, aged care, out-of-home care sector, when they witness either unethical or unlawful conduct, and how they're protected and who they report that conduct to is the nature of that piece of legislation. Essentially, the revision to that Act or the new piece of legislation is about lowering the bar for reporting and raising the, I guess, the number of the dollar value figure of penalties that an organisation can occur if they bully, harass, demean, demote, or otherwise sort of, react to a whistleblower that makes a public interest disclosure. Interestingly, for all of us in the room, the probably critical piece there is that this new act actually references bullying of a whistleblower in relation to making a disclosure under this new Public Interest Disclosure Act is now actually directly linked to psychosocial hazards in relation to the Work Health and Safety Act. So just like the Respect at Work bill, they've linked the psychosocial aspect of making a public interest disclosure back to the Work Health and Safety Act, meaning that if, let's say, a state government employee makes a public interest disclosure, that's a relevant disclosure about unethical or unlawful conduct, and as a result, they are subject to psychological or psychosocial, mistreatment resulting in a psychological injury, then that is actually also considered a breach of the Public Interest Disclosure Act provisions as well. Did I explain? That's probably the simplest way I can wrap my head around it.
Because the interesting thing, of course, is that often whistleblowers are not treated well. So it's good to see that they've now linked it to psychological safety at work. So I think that's a good thing, a good outcome there.
And I'll just before you jump into manslaughter, so the really specific definitions this new act makes around serious wrongdoing or what would constitute a public interest disclosure is quite clear and well articulated. So there's essentially 6 reasons they offer in this new bit of legislation. One's corrupt conduct, 2 is serious maladministration. Immediately, as soon as I heard that, I immediately went, oh, okay, well, that pretty much covers every single state government entity in New South Wales, because isn't serious maladministration just the MO of most government departments in New South Wales anyway?
Let's not get into spending money wisely. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Moving on.
Yeah, a government information contravention, a privacy contravention, a serious and substantial waste of public money. Geez, what a clanger that one is. And a local government pecuniary interest contravention is the last one. So that's the whole sort of, what do you call it? You know, your fringe benefits. Think about, you know, Barry O'Farrell and the infamous bottle of Grange, all that sort of stuff. So that's the 6 there. And obviously, look, it's really interesting and relevant. There's a bunch of stuff that it relates to in the Corporations Act for those that sit outside of that, let's call it the net of that public interest disclosure, but it's a space to watch really, I guess, carefully if you're exposed to it. So Bron, WHS.
Okay. So the New South Wales government have passed by Parliament, currently waiting assent, the introduction of industrial manslaughter provisions for New South Wales. So you might remember, as part of the Boland review done in 2018, many states in Australia introduced industrial manslaughter provisions, but New South Wales did not. New South Wales moved from recklessness to gross negligence because it was felt at the time that it was, you know, just as good as, because it's easier to prove negligence than it was recklessness. So they went to gross negligence. But now with the change of government, the new government has now brought New South Wales into line with most other states by introducing industrial manslaughter provisions. And the timeline for the introduction is the first half of 2024. So that one's on its way. Now, at the time, the other regulators based in South Australia and Tasmania, as well as Comcare, the federal safety regulator, they also did not introduce industrial manslaughter provisions. But South Australia has now introduced a bill to their parliament for same. So they're going down industrial manslaughter route, as is Comcare. So Comcare have also introduced their bill to parliament. But this leaves Tasmania out on their own. So if you have a look at some of the media in Tasmania at the moment, now the Tasmanian government is under enormous pressure to also introduce industrial manslaughter provisions, and the unions are calling for change in that space. So if they did that, then it would be uniform across Australia then. Industrial manslaughter provisions would be in every state. So for New South Wales, that change is now confirmed and on its way, with industrial manslaughter due to be in effect in the first half of 2024. But for those of you that are operating businesses across different states at the moment, there's still inconsistency. Another change that has come about as part of this recent raft of change in New South Wales in relation to the WHS Act relates to insurance. So you might remember when they made the previous change, when they introduced gross negligence after the Boland review, what they did was made it, they prohibited taking out insurance to cover your penalties, for WHS penalties. But at that time, many organisations still had contracts in place. So now the change is that all those contracts have now been void. So you can't take out insurance to cover WHS penalties. And if you've currently got a contract in place, it's now void. So that's the other change that's coming in there.
Do you remember, Bron, sorry, in the early days when this first came in, and Chris, I remember we chatted about it with you, it wasn't uncommon for us to still find policies with that line of cover in it, even 3 to 6 months after that change had been implemented, and insurers being largely oblivious or ignorant to it as well. So it's interesting.
Yeah, insurers aren't known for their pace at changing PDSs to line up with things. But the one thing probably just to be aware of with that is that you can still have your legal costs covered. So the cost to defend the claim will still sit under your management liability policy. So it is worth if you're the business owner, to check that out and make sure it's in there, because it's not cheap. Having
No,
done
good point.
Yeah, and
Good
you can
point.
still cover your defence costs. You just can't cover the actual penalty. So
yeah,
the $1.3 million fine that comes your way,
yeah,
still coming your way.
but
Absolutely, in relation to the defence costs. But there's also a clause in there that says we will not provide cover if it's illegal to do so. So they'll give you the cover at the time, but if it changes during the year where you can't provide it, there's a clause in there that says, well, we're not going to give you any cover because we're not allowed to. It's illegal.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thanks,
Hey,
Adam.
Sam, good to have you with us, mate. Just jump on in. We're just going through legislative updates.
Okay, and then probably the last legislative update just to be aware of relates to Intellectual Property Laws Amendment Bill, and that relates to trademarks. So if this is something in your space that you're interested in, be aware it was changes to the process for attaining trademarks and renewing trademarks. So if that's of interest to you, jump on and have a look at the updates to the Intellectual Property Laws Amendment Bill. That was another change that we saw come through recently.
Okay, moving on. New standards. I'll just cover off this one quickly. So it's as exciting as it sounds, whistleblowing management systems.
But it got a puppy dog.
It did. It got a puppy dog to make you feel a little bit excited. Unjustified. Yeah, unjustifiably so. So yeah, that standard just covers off things around the nature of how you put these policies in place and how you structure report and response mechanisms. So again, if it's an area that you're heavily exposed to, so I'd say, yeah, you know, any of our sort of for-purpose clients, anyone that works for, supports, or works with local government or state government, it's really worthwhile getting your head around it, because it means
Healthcare.
yeah, healthcare, anything like that. Because what it means is effectively, like, you know, we're suppliers to plenty of local government entities, and it would mean that if we witnessed unethical, any of the things that fall under those 6 pillars while we're delivering services for a local government entity, we can also make a public interest disclosure as well as a consultant or an advisor. Technically, a visitor or a contractor can make one as well, provided they know who is the responsible person to make that disclosure to. So yeah, have a look at that one. And then Bron on
what's good about that particular standard, I think, as well, that's worthwhile mentioning, is it includes information on how to effectively respond to reports. And I think that's the one thing a lot of organisations do poorly. So if you think of the ATO with Richard Boyle, Bundaberg Hospital with the nursing unit manager who made a disclosure against an unlicensed doctor, or the Newcastle politician and the office staff there that made their whistleblower statements, they don't get treated very well. And this standard actually gives you information on how to respond to reports of whistleblowing. So I think that's really important one.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to just make themselves feel terrible about humanity, listen to the podcast that involves the lady that blew the whistle on Milton Orkopoulos, and it just breaks your heart. So she, in effect, even though we know how much of a horrific, vile animal Orkopoulos turned out to be, the interesting fact was that she was totally pariahed by her own workmates as a result of blowing the whistle, and virtually kissed her career goodbye, even though she was totally in the right by doing it, and even though he was prosecuted and subsequently sent to jail. There's some really paradoxical behavioural psychology that exists in that world, and yeah, it's grim. But if you like that sort of true crime podcast type stuff, give the ABC podcast a listen that relates to Orkopoulos, and it's pretty dark stuff.
I think they had a whole section on whistleblowers, didn't they, in that podcast?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think there's like about 6 episodes. They're only about half an hour each too, so they're worth listening to. I'll add the link in the email. But then the psychological ones.
Yeah, so the standard that came out last year on psychological health and safety at work guidelines for managing psychosocial risks, a new Australian New Zealand standard. And anyway, that one accompanies 45,001, which is the work health and safety standard for physical safety at work. So now we've got the psychological one, and obviously you would want to read that one in accompaniment to the state-based regulators' code of practice, because all of the state-based safety regulators have now issued a code of practice on managing psychosocial hazards at work. So this Australian, New Zealand international standard also works in accompaniment with that. So there's a couple of new standards there for you to be aware of.
I was chatting to one of our mining colleagues yesterday who said that, you know, the way the mining industry, I think, collectively feels about this at the moment, and that includes regulators who we're doing some work with on helping them better understand psychosocial hazards in the mining sector and how they might want to regulate that, which if you look at the cohort of stale, pale and male inspectors that comprise the New South Wales mining regulator, that's an interesting proposition in of itself, given that cohort. But one of them said to us, look, it's a bit like now, not only do we have to employ these people, it's like we've got to adopt them as well. And I thought that pretty much sums up how those guys feel about this. They don't know where to go with it, and they feel like everything is just so touchy-feely with it, and no one's actually talking practical application. And I think if you look at the recent run on conferences, it seems like everyone that's got an org psych business in Australia has suddenly become an expert on psychosocial hazards at work. And I don't think the two necessarily match. I think some of those psychologists need to stay in their lane and leave the practical application for those that actually practically understand. And so I think it'll be interesting.
And the practical application is not give everyone a teaspoon of cement.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not what the mining industry is doing, but it's certainly not everyone sitting around in a sewing circle either. It's somewhere well in the middle of that. And so it'll be interesting to see what this standard does, whether it makes it worse, better, whatever.
It's only employed at the moment, though, I can tell you that much.
Exactly. Well, I mean, arguably it's, you know, any of us in this area, it's there's plenty of questions being asked, risk assessments need to be done, policies need to be developed, all that stuff. So, yeah.
I said to you last time we were chatting, you know, there was a time where 20% of the work was psychology, and now it's 80%. So,
yeah, that's right.
Without talking to someone that is looking to or has made a psychological claim that we need to do something on.
Yeah, wow. All right, well, moving on. And yes, Daniel, it is a visual depiction of the claims running rampant. So thanks for that comment in the chat.
I just wanted a nice puppy dog, and see, I've got milk and cookies on this one. So
okay.
I was trying to put us all into a happy place. So. Okay, safety regulators, you happy for me to kick off?
Yep, keep going. Yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. So firstly, SafeWork New South Wales have now published their new Respect at Work strategy paper, which focuses on the removal of bullying and sexual harassment at work. So earlier this year, SafeWork New South Wales, when they published their priorities, announced Respect at Work and psychological safety as their compliance priorities. So their new paper called Respect at Work outlines their 4-year strategy for the removal of sexual harassment and bullying in the workplace. So jump onto their webpage and have a look at that strategy if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. Now, what's interesting with SafeWork New South Wales is there's been some structural change as well in the government. So SafeWork New South Wales is now moving out to be a standalone department. So it's moving out from under the umbrella of the Department of Customer Service, where it's been sitting for a little while. So this is to make it stand out and become its own entity, and really to put some focus on safety at work. The newly appointed DepSec is coming over from Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and he is already saying that he wants more resources to go to compliance activities. So for those of us in New South Wales, I think we're going to see continued focus on, just everything workplace health and safety. And the fact that they're bringing it out from the Department of Customer Service and bringing it up a level really means that I think we're in for some change in that space. A couple of other things for our safety regulators. WorkSafe WA. I don't know if we've got Tennille on the call, but
no, Stu, I don't think Stu or Tennille are with us this month, but that's all good.
Okay. Well, for anyone who's got businesses operating in WA, Their process has been called modernising workers' comp, and what was interesting is about time, because the last time they really touched it apparently was 1981. But
There's got to be a joke about West Oz there because they're not here. I know, Adam, you're from West Oz originally, but geez, there's got to be at least one cheap shot, especially with that comment.
No. Anyway, for anybody that operates a business in WA, apparently this is now rolling out in early 2024 with full implementation by 1 July 24. And the key changes there include updates to injury management, medical assessment, and insurance. So if you have a look on the WorkSafe WA webpage, you'll find the full details, and they have a number of fact sheets there too to sort of break it down and make it easier to read. So, so that's what's happening in WA. In the ACT, they have now introduced their code of practice for psychological safety and have updated their codes of practice on consultation and crystalline silica. And I think, James, you had something you wanted to add in that space.
Yeah. Look, I'll jump on to that in a sec. Bronna, had you finished with this slide? Because it's on the next slide. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay,
And all I was going to say with the regulator stuff, for those in New South Wales particularly, or really doesn't matter. I know Daniel and Andrew have probably seen it before in Queensland, and I know Chris would have in other sectors. Usually what happens when you have a move like this with SafeWork New South Wales is kind of similar to what happened with the mining industry about 8 or 10 years ago. So I guess the step change that's likely to happen will just mean that you're probably going to find that there'll be more inspectors roaming around doing more unannounced visits. Their compliance activity usually steps up, and they'll be looking for sort of strategic prosecutions to make in terms of they'll probably have some aggressive KPIs set for them. They'll be kind of out on the hunt. And if New South Wales mining regulators anything to go by, they also went through a period where they started recruiting a lot of ex-police detectives. So I don't know whether that's part of the strategy with SafeWork New South Wales, but again, that's just something to be mindful of. If all of a sudden you start to see elevated activity from them, that's usually the reason. Is that a fair comment, Ron?
Yeah, and in light of that, when SafeWork New South Wales announced their compliance priorities earlier this year, one of them related to working at heights and risk of falls. And I know for a fact where I live, there's 2 inspectors and they're regularly out and about town. And today, as I drove home from the beach this morning, there was 2 workers on an awning, up about 4 or 5 meters working without harnesses. And I thought, they just don't get the message. And I know for a fact that if the safety inspectors based where I am had seen that, then that would have immediately caused a problem. So, we need to be vigilant not because the inspectors are out, but because we want people to be safe. But we'll start to see a lot more in the compliance space. So I expect a lot more prosecutions.
That's right.
On that, I think there's the judges have had enough of it, and there may be a little bit more watch this space in that working from height arena.
Okay.
It was at the start of the year. There was an article from the 3 judges that work in this space, and they are really sick and tired of finding businesses. And they're feeling as though the message isn't getting through, and the fines have increased substantially. Like, we're not talking about it's an extra $1,000. We're talking for a small business with $1 million turnover, they're still looking at whacking $800,000 fines at them.
Yeah, so that'd send them straight to the wall.
Send them broke. Unless they have a good
that's right.
rank.
And you can't insure your way out of that. So that's interesting. So there's no insurance cover for it.
No.
And I expect that this move to make them a standalone department is also going to really increase the focus. And, if they bring them out and make them, reporting directly, then, you can only foresee the amount of inspections and that sort of thing that's going to go on.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris, what was that last bit?
Oh, you just need a really good solicitor to sort it out for you. But the biggest part is, I think, when the judges do their end-of-year review, I wouldn't be surprised if there was more articles out about it, and some bigger push for change, because I'm with you, Bron. I drive around and I'm constantly horrified. And look, on occasions I have sort of stopped and gone, hey, what's going on? And they know they've done the wrong thing because they immediately jump off the roof as soon as you ask the question. And this was just in our own building one day, where I was just making sure they weren't stuffing around with the internet, because we had a small internet issue. And yeah, they were all terrified, thinking I was an inspector.
Yeah, so they know. Yeah, so they know they're doing the wrong thing, and more often than not, it's young blokes as well. Like, blokes are great at killing ourselves at work comparatively to women anyway. But yeah, young guys are elite. Like, that's one of their greatest skills. Getting injured or killed at work is like, it's the statistics are like, it's like 8 times as likely if you're 18 to 25. And yeah, you're right. The ones we see in Sydney all the time. And I reckon Newcastle's pretty rampant as well, because they kind of have the we'll just get away with it type attitude. Like,
should be right.
Yeah. So anyway, and look, Daniel, yeah, I saw your comment. Yeah, that's not the first time that I've heard people make those types of comments about getting emails from workers saying your work demands to complete a piece of work by a particular date are causing me psychosocial harm. That it's one of the inevitable downsides of wading into this space, that the bush lawyers get a hold of it and try and twist it around out of context. And I mean, to be honest, even before this code of practice was in place, when we were working, Bron and I, together in state government, that was par for the course then. Like, we had a team that hadn't attended work for nearly 6 months because they'd taken issue with the directions that their manager had given them, which was literally just to turn up to work and attend normal schedule.
Do your job.
Yeah, essentially do your job. So yeah, it's not the last time we'll see it. Just touch it. Do you want to touch on the OECD stuff quickly, Bron? Because then I'll cover off those other bits and we'll go to open discussion, because I don't want us to lose the golden part of the conversation. Yeah.
There is some defense that Daniel available, but he could probably give us a call offline if you wanted to chat.
Yeah, Chris is good at making those go away, aren't you?
And look, this was just a reminder about the increased focus on the regulation and use of AI in the workplace. So we talked about this at length last month. That was the whole topic of last month's discussion. So please get your notes out and have a look at the recording from last month. The Denton's team did this one for us. It was very informative. Expect more change in this space. At the moment, Australia doesn't have a specific regulation. We're using the Privacy Act, Copyright Act, Trademark Act and Patent Act to deal with a lot of this, but expect some change in this space. So that was really just, have a listen to last month's session, but yeah, keep an eye on that one.
Yep. Okay. And then look, in terms of keeping an eye out, I'll come back to the top in a second. I just want to highlight this one here at the bottom, which is the fallout from essentially this. So I found this in today's ABC. I thought it was a really interesting photo. So that's a mining asbestos, or workers in a mine bagging asbestos at Wittenoom, that's in Western Australia, in 1958. Obviously, asbestos is still a huge deal. There's ongoing issues in this town, and there's now a traditional owner and a group of traditional owners that have come out that are all actually suffering mesothelioma as a result of almost like third-party exposure to asbestos from the operation, and it's a big saga. But what it all kind of gathers together in is Queensland have recently done a parliamentary inquiry into the re-emergence of what they call coal workers' pneumoconiosis. I'm going to say that last bit wrong, but so black lung in mine workers in Queensland. That's a huge deal, because for a lot of years there, the dust exposure limits in Queensland underground mines have been significantly higher than in New South Wales. And they believe that having those, exposure levels at a higher level and not doing as extensive testing and auditing has allowed this to re-emerge. And so I think it's significant for all of us, and especially those that might, again, work in or in the vicinity of the mining industry. This is probably likely to trigger some aggressive change in exposure standards for the Queensland industry. And then the New South Wales industry is already kind of maybe a little bit ahead again, but you just expect to be this ongoing focus everywhere on essentially air quality in workplaces, but particularly air quality in mines, and particularly underground mines. So I think it's just important to keep your eyes on the prize on that, because whatever falls out of those industries will inevitably roll down into every other industry in time. And with that as well, keep your eye out in the next month or so for the compliance priorities for regulators for next year. Some of them will publish this year, some of them won't. And Bron, I'll go back to the top of the list there and let you take over from that top point there before we go to discussion.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so firstly, changes to the acts and regulations as it relates in the disability sector following the Royal Commission. So that's concluded now. The final report has been published. It made 222 recommendations. And these recommendations were made, and I'm quoting here, to improve laws, policies, structures, and practices in the sector. So keep an eye out for that. If you are in that sector, expect change. They didn't have a Royal Commission for nothing. But in particular, I would expect to see it in the space of restricted practices. So while we're on the disability sector, it's worthwhile noting, and this will come out in your resources post this session, there was an incident recently where a disability support worker was assaulted in a situation where they were new to the organisation, and they were asked to take over a shift in a house they hadn't worked at before. There was no handover notes, and the individual in the house had a history of assault, and the disability support worker, the going there, didn't have that information. So we'll send that incident out to you. Be aware. That one happened in South Australia, but I mean, we all know what the disability sector's like. That incident could have happened anywhere. Two recent incidents I talked to you before about successful claims coming through from working from home during COVID. So we might start to see some of these sort of start to roll their way through the courts now. So these are approved workers' compensation claims.
Was this the one with the lady with the dogs? Or am I thinking
yes.
else? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, so that was one of them. In New South Wales, a worker working from home intervened in a dog fight that happened on her front lawn, and she was injured, and that injury was deemed to be in the course of her employment, so it was compensable. And the second one, the worker was injured due to their poor ergonomic setup of their workstation at home. So what it actually was the aggravation of a pre-existing non-work-related injury that was then aggravated through working at home with poor ergonomic setup for their workstation. So like I said, these will come out, but I'm expecting that we might start to see more of these claims trolling their way through the courts. In addition to that, anyone who reads a paper will notice there is now an increase in claims being lodged for bullying at work. Two recent ones were at Australia Post and Court Services Victoria, but there's many others, and we expect with the Respect at Work laws, the psychosocial legislative requirements and changes there, we might start to see more of these come through. All organisations should be making sure they've got policies, procedures and training on this, because the claims are now starting to make their way through.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that if you're not already doing, the easiest place to start is, if you haven't already done it, do a risk assessment. I mean, you want to include it on your existing risk register anyway, but that's really, just putting it on your risk register is not good enough. You actually need to take the time to do a risk assessment. It's easier said than done. And also be aware that you might unveil things that are a bit the whole, like, you can't unknow. What is it? Ignorance is bliss kind of thing. Like once you unveil things, you might be forced to do something about them, whether it's, we've seen in mining so far, things like horrendous fatigue management plans that were just willingly breached all over the place. And there was an incident in the Valley not that long ago, a single vehicle incident where the contractor, who thankfully survived but was injured, had worked. Do you remember what the number was, Bron? It was something like, it was like 22 night shifts straight or something ridiculous like that. 22 12-hour night shifts straight without any break, and then unsurprisingly did a micro sleep on the back road at Broke or something and crashed into a tree. But just that kind of stuff is really getting a lot of focus now, and particularly from the mining regulator. So if you haven't already looked at that from a risk assessment perspective, it's pretty advisable to do so, particularly if you've got staff travelling or for work, or traveling distances to and from work.
Yeah. And then just to finish it off, the focus on corporate ethics. So that's not going to die anytime soon, and expect some change in this space, particularly in Australia as it related to the uproar for PwC and Qantas. But in the US now, they've just announced an investigation into Tesla's claims of, the claims they make in relation to their vehicles, their business practices, including their executive remuneration. So that sort of focus around corporate ethics. And again, we always say, take a risk managed approach, use risk management in your business decision making. A lot of organisations should be doing that, but the focus on corporate ethics is also not going to go away. And then probably lastly, keep an eye on, people risk. So have a look at our August session where we discussed people risk in detail, but the ongoing struggle around securing resources, people, skills, etc., that continues to stay on everyone's radar. So in terms of emerging ongoing issues, people risk would be another one. So yeah, have a look at what we published in August session around people risk if you'd like a bit more information.
Yeah,
and they're the things that we came up with around keeping an eye out for.
Everything, including, I think we've seen, you guys have probably seen it too, like this huge program by one of the industrial fabrication companies to bring like 5 welders out from the Philippines or something like that. Like that's the length that organizations are having to go to, because they literally could not get 4 people that were qualified welders in Australia. Like that's insane, but that's just how some companies are needing to go about things to get skills and people. So look, I'll cut that now because we don't have a huge amount of time, but we wanted to actually really get the power of the discussion happening, and predominantly wanted to find out what are you guys seeing around you? Like, has anyone got an issue, or I guess something in that sort of risk profile we've put together there that's really irking you, or that you're losing sleep over for your organization?
I'll speak.
Okay,
James?
Go for it, Heidi. Yeah.
So I think in being in the aged care industry, to your point of bringing in skilled workers, we're now, because there's no nurses and the laws of having 24/7 nursing care, etc. We're bringing in sponsorship from East Timor. We're bringing from every other country. So we then introduce a risk because yes, they're from East Timor, but we're also putting them out into the regions because it's our regional sites that require the staffing. So you can see what that risk profile will look like when we're bringing people from a country that is very different to Australia, putting them into a country setting or a regional setting, and then having a look at what risk mitigation things can we do, what support are we providing to babysit them, so to speak, so that they transition into the Australian way of job life. So looking at all those, well, not only their job role, but also what bank do they use? How do they go grocery shopping when they're used to a little market on the side, etc. So language barriers because they're Portuguese based. So there's a lot of different things that we're looking at in the aged care space. Also looking at the overuse of agencies. So agencies are popping up everywhere. And what we're finding now is the agency may have an injury at site. They don't tell us, well, we report it and we have it on our books and everything, but it gets managed from a workers' comp perspective by the host, like the agency company.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is a couple of years down the track, we end up with a common law claim. So it's coming backwards. So yes, they've exhausted their workers' comp entitlement. So then they come back and then say, you didn't provide a safe workplace as the host employer. So they're starting to have that sort of, so they're the things that we're starting to see at the moment.
Yeah, and when you're referring to agencies, Heidi, do you mean like labour hire?
Nursing agencies, yeah.
Yeah, so you're not talking about like Hire Up or those platforms or anything. You're talking about like labour hire,
staffing.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah, and certainly, I've been on the rear end of that as well. I've had it on a site before where a contractor didn't even report an injury to us on site, and then 3 years later came back at the mining company, even though we didn't even know the injury ever occurred. So I think it's certainly a real risk issue
It's a real risk to see how do we circumnavigate and get them to tell us. So get the agents to say, guess what? Joe Blow has now put in a workers' comp claim just for your thing. So that's circling back. I think it's really good.
Yeah, and Daniel's saying
Yeah.
this has been pretty common in the care space for many years. Look, based on our experience with working with aged care and out-of-home care and disability, it seems like it's certainly a ripe environment for that to happen.
Yeah, and the New South Wales regulators have put aged care on their books to come and do the compliance testing. So compliance is ramped up.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
We've
Yeah.
had many visits already.
That's right.
Oh,
And then
wow.
obviously, yeah, because we did some media on it last year. It's a pretty horrendously high bar to set to now say that you've got to have an RN on site in every resi facility 24 hours a day. Like that puts a
Yeah.
huge amount of pressure on a sector that's already under-resourced and struggling. So
Correct.
yeah. So and I think, yeah, where are you finding on that note, Heidi, how are you finding that manifesting at the moment with the RN requirement? Because that's already in, isn't it? That was like July or something.
Yeah, and look, we're already doing it. You've
Yeah.
got to try and put it in. That's why we're getting nurses from overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
Wow.
sponsoring. We're now sponsoring nurses from overseas because there's not enough on the ground in Australia.
And especially in that RN space, is that what you mean?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And then you've got to look
Yeah.
at attraction and retention. So looking at what process have you got in place, because everyone wants to compete against with money, but people
Yeah.
aren't looking at just money anymore. They're looking at that whole person approach to being an employee. What are we
Yeah.
offering that puts us apart from someone else?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that because I don't think, did you join us on the session with Carolyn last month in Queensland? You were there? I can't remember.
I was there on Teams, yeah.
On Teams, yeah.
I
I'm
was
sure
Zoom
it was
or
either
whatever,
that
yeah.
session or another one saying that they're experiencing with the millennials that it's almost like, what to your point, Heidi, around they'll accept less pay if they feel like they've got really clear sort of purpose and impact with their job. But if you can't articulate that really clearly with the younger generation, it's almost a bit like you could offer them heaps of money, but they're still
That's
not
right.
really going. They might take the job, but they won't stay. Like there'll be a high turnover
Correct.
churn rate. So yeah, I think there's some interesting issues there. Daniel, have you got anything to add in that space? Because I know you're sort of in that world, like you're in that sector and in that world as well.
Only that I think it's been mismanaged.
Yeah.
There's a massive gap between when the funding became available and when you were required to do it, and so a lot of the smaller providers were basically priced out of the market because they couldn't afford to pay the extra money to put the nurses on, and so a lot of them have just departed the market. And so you look, and a lot of the bigger organisations are having to step in and buy assets and then obviously try and run these assets, and a lot of them are in rural and remote communities.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been very, very difficult in this space, and I concur with the comments that the risks that we're having to take to onboard people and to get them into the workplace and actually on the floor, our normal induction processes are being compressed because we just cannot get people on the floor quick enough.
Yep.
And so that just exposes us to massive risks. And so, we're having to, even the fact that we used to have a policy where we had 2 weeks of induction where you weren't able to go onto the floor without shadowing someone for 2 weeks. We can't even do that induction process anymore because we can't afford that person to be off the floor, inducting that person for 2 weeks, and we just don't have the staff. And so we're having to develop more sophisticated ways of inducting people and educating them in some very high risk scenarios. Lifting and caring for people is quite difficult.
Yeah, I know it's challenging. Like it's I always find it really disappointing because you rarely hear good news stories come out of that aged care, disability or out of home care space. Like you do, but I feel like the majority of them live on that side and not on the like, hey, everything, here's an amazing thing that's really helped people achieve a better quality of life, which is disappointing given that we're an aging population and that sector will need to continue to grow to be able to service that aging population into the future. So I think there's some bigger macro kind of questions in play there. So anyone else, I guess, Queels, I was actually wanting to jump to you for a second to find out, because I know that you obviously have got some extensive client base in that local government, not-for-profit sector. Is there anything you're sort of seeing in and around that that kind of risk profile change, or even anything related to the public interest disclosure stuff?
Yeah, I mean, all of them are going through and reviewing and updating their PIDs at the moment with the changes in the legislation, and now it's putting more emphasis on deploying more of those authorised PIDs within the frontline staff. So previously it was always at the top end, and I think that was forcing a lot of people to not disclose things, or they have perceived that they weren't, because they meant to go speak to the general manager to talk about a supervisor that was doing the wrong thing. So that definition's now expanded so far that even if you're if you have oversight of one person, you ultimately become a PID officer. But for some of these people out on the front line, they've got no idea what all that means, all the rules, all the technicalities, and what they can and can't say and to whom. And it's just a bit of Pandora's box that's still yet to open fully, I think. I think it's pretty big space. And one thing that I'm, in going and listening to what you're saying is that working from home, I just, and that particular case, I mean, at what point does she, and, who would be in business these days at the moment? It's unbelievable. So it's just crazy. It's just
so true.
Are you talking about the one where I said the lady intervened with a dog fight on a front lawn?
Yeah, well, it's any of that, right? So, I mean, if staff are in the office, we can walk past and go, hey, that's not the right way to sit on that chair, or that chair's not right, or it's, something doesn't look right, and we can intervene that way. But if they're at home and we're looking via Zoom, we've got no oversight really on,
what's going on.
Yeah, exactly right. And as much as you try and push and give them the things they need to be able to do it, but where does it start and stop of a responsibility just because they've clocked on? They peel a banana, they slip on in their own kitchen, but it's between the hours of 9 to 5. Does this become our responsibility?
I know. And then
where does it start and stop?
And I think it goes even further, because we've got a lot of colleagues now, because we're using developers and other people, specialized people offshore. A lot of them are digital nomads, and they're living in places like Thailand, Bali, Vietnam, Japan, anywhere they want to live. And I wonder about different if you're a freelancer, but if you're actually working for a big company like Google, and there's plenty of them that are employed directly by Google, living in Bali, doing full stack engineering or something like that. Same would apply there in terms of how does any entity maintain some level of oversight over, in a crazy place like Indonesia or Thailand, where there is no real workplace standards around this sort of stuff, how you kind of navigate that minefield.
Well, you used to be able to, and you'd just have short-term 1-year contracts or something, but now the government's changed the laws. You've got 2 years of that continuously. You're deemed an employee and you're captured as part of all this.
That's right. And then there's the separate issue that was announced this week about these IR loopholes that they're trying to close as well. That terrifies me in terms of same sort of thing. When is a casual, they're saying that it's going to push a whole bunch of casuals onto permanent part-time, but which will push all of them ultimately into being liabilities for us as employers, because we'll have to pay super, leave loadings, all these sort of things. So anyway, that's separate issue, but very, very topical and pertinent at the moment. And I saw Andrew there saying in one instance, the key executive role has been rolled over 3 times in 12 months and even now is vacant. I think, look, could I put it out there, and you guys tell me if I think, because, I like to be facetious and a smart ass, is that Bron and I have debated this whole concept. Is it getting to the point where people that want to hold a C-suite role in a big organization, you just need to shut the fuck up and be at work most of the time in person? And if you want to have a leadership role that's at a key decision-making level, you're going to need to expect to be available in person when the CEO or the board need you. And if you don't want to do that, then chances are you're probably not set up or capable of getting beyond that sort of technical professional. I'm just putting it out there.
Don't bring logic to it. Don't bring logic to it.
Yeah,
I want my title and I want my paycheck.
Yeah. Because it's that's how I kind of just feel like you cannot be an executive level professional working 3 days a week from a bloody kitchen table in Mooloolaba for an organization based in Singapore. It just doesn't work like that. Yeah. And I just think if you want that, then you have to go another, I'm not saying you can't do that.
There's trade-offs for everything.
Yeah, I just don't think it's reasonable to say I'm going to be the CRO for Commonwealth Bank, but I'm going to live in Paris and I'm going to come and see you in person twice a year for annual general meetings or something like that. It's just not practical. Whereas some technical roles, I feel like you can get away with doing them remotely from anywhere. But I don't know. Tell me I'm wrong or I'm bullshitting. Kath's saying no, need to be seen. So yeah, who knows? Who knows? Who else? Chris, what barbs have you got to throw in on a Wednesday?
That's it. Bring the lawyer in. There we
Yeah.
go.
Well, I was just about to say, thanks, Quills. I always appreciate your support. I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift back to working in the office.
Yeah.
And I was speaking with someone, and I can't remember, it was one of the big four banks, I believe, where there was an expectation more for the small business aspect around their buildings and the impact that had been having and what they were starting to see community-wise. So the business felt that it was their responsibility to the small business community that they had to be back in the buildings.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that there's a lot of cultural wins that come with having people back together and having just changed roles into a business which is in the office a lot more.
Yeah.
Primarily because we have clients coming in and there's a lot more face-to-face meetings. It's a very different culture going from a business where it was, 80% work at home and 20% in the office. So
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised to see that shift start to happen a bit more across larger businesses.
Well, I've got one other little angle to throw into that, which I think is relevant to the technological evolution, right? And it was just based on this, because I've been watching these videos a bit, and it's probably just me being bored about these digital nomads in all sorts of far-flung tropical countries. But what
you
we
just do some real actual work and just stop napping around.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess this is what this is what happens on Friday night when my wife goes out and I get left at home with the kids. I just start like going down YouTube vortexes. But no, what I thought was interesting was that Ben, one of our strategists that we work with in in Sydney, was saying that he reckons that yes, there is this change in some of these roles in this like tech sector space. So if you're working with developers and certain people that are in these very specific and technical roles in that space, a lot of them are actually quite interesting, introverted, quirky people that thrive in those kind of isolated environments. And some of them love to work like sort of, 11 p.m. till 3 a.m. every night. They work weird hours and stuff like that. And so the only comment I was going to make was, does it seem that some businesses, if you need to engage with those types of professionals and you don't want to have them in-house with you, you need to be able to navigate that sort of world of that, quirky sort of, neurodivergent, hyper technical specialist world. But on the same token, the people that really make the decisions need to have the capacity to be together in person and eyeball each other on a regular basis to be able to get that cohesion. So that's just my thinking. Is that sort of what you're saying, Chris?
So you're saying there's some really weirdos out there that you don't want in the office anyway? Is that the...
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you would have them in the office, but they'd want to work like 11:30 till 4 a.m. every night, because that's how some of those guys work. And I'm not being facetious. That is, we work with them now, and that's literally some of them. I don't want to talk to you in person. I want you to give me a brief. I want you to give me a timeline and a standard, and then leave me alone, please. And then I'll deliver an amazing job. They just don't want to be interacted with and told that they're special. They just want to do project by project and be left alone.
They just have their direction and that's it. And look, I've got a friend like that. For whatever reason, she just cannot start before 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And she's a professor at a university and just runs her own hours as a result of that, doing her own research.
Yeah.
And that's the way she's been able to structure it. So
he's saying that's fine, Andrew, because that's how you like to work, 11 p.m. till 4 a.m.
11 to 11.
11.
And that's the way she works. So
yeah, I was going to say,
I think you need to put yourself in that role as opposed to you need to find that role for yourself. That's a sort of a bit of a personal choice thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. I just know where I am now. I've had a lot of benefit from the partner I work with being in the office and having that very clear contact every single day, and that open door jump in policy. It's been a real different experience.
Okay. Yeah. Well, look, interesting, really interesting stuff. So I guess we're just about shot the clock. So was there any other comments or, I guess, statements that anyone else wanted to make that hasn't already spoken? Because I know we've got a few off camera as well. All right. No, look, and as always, thanks for everyone contributing to the chat. I actually think the chat's a whole different dimension that, for some of us that prefer to chat, throw things out that way, that's great. And, the more we keep that chat buoyant, the more it contributes to the discussion overall. But look, unless you've got anything, Bron, I might wrap us up at that and just say a big thank you to everyone for joining us as always. Heidi, Chris, Squeals, Daniel, Andrew, Adam, Kath, really appreciate your contribution. Thanks, Kath. Yeah, enjoying the conversation as well. And yeah, look forward to seeing you guys next month. So what's that? That's November.
November will be the end of the year. November is our last Community of Risk Management for 2023. And then we'll be back again for February in 2024.
And we will warn you now, it's going to be in a totally different format, but that will all be revealed to you in due course, and we'll individually be going around to chat about what that's going to look like. But needless to say, we're hoping 2024 is going to see a big return of some of our out of time zone friends and well-wishers like Rupert and some of the Singapore, Southeast Asian crew. We've also got some really great new connections in Nepal, of all places, and they're looking forward to come and join the conversation, because I guess India and Nepal are very keen to build an amazing, middle class of professional services professionals, and they're very keen to digest what's going on in the West. So hopefully we'll be welcoming them in to the fold next year.
Couple of beers in December as well, mate, or is there?
Yeah, your shout, Chris, isn't it?
Well, you're just getting in for the Christmas party.
Yeah, of course.
No, as always, yeah, we'll definitely do a drinks in Newcastle, but I think we're thinking maybe this might be the last one of them being in Newcastle, and probably next year onwards we might do a Sydney based thing, because I think so. But when's B&E again? Well, you got to turn up for the drinks afterwards, Andrew, to be
Yeah, you
that'll
just
teach you to
come
have
along
children.
and then
Wander off. Yeah, no. I was going to say, that'll teach you to have school-age children. Exactly. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, as always. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll look out for the recording and the resources. See ya.
Cool. Okay.